Well, thank you, Daniel, and thank you to everybody in the Albuquerque team, to Paul and Bill and so many others that are here, Reed, that have been such great coming in yesterday and last night. This is the first time I've been to Albuquerque, I believe, but I could not believe how many people I knew from here. It goes back several years. I was in a group with Mary Alice. As I say, I've known Daniel and others and Bill through the years at FCCI, and so it's great fun to be here. We're really excited to be here, looking forward to coming back and getting to know everybody more and more. So I was talking to Richard last night. He's not here this morning, but I'm going to tell a little story anyway. And I feel like I'm a little bit the opposite of Richard. I truly am kind of the warm-up act. If I got it right, I heard from Paul that they tried to get Richard to speak 4 times, but he just would only put 3 in his contract, and so I ended up being your 4th there. So hopefully we'll have a little bit to say. I was telling Richard when we were getting off the airplane yesterday that I've met his dad, Henry, several times. I'm from Atlanta. I've met Richard a few times, but I've been around Henry a few more. And one of the great memories I have is that about 7 or 8 years ago, I went with a group from Atlanta to Liberia. And the group was planning, the goal of the trip was to get the 50 most influential business leaders, the 50 most influential educators, and 50 most church leaders, and the 50 most influential government leaders to come together for this 3-day conference. We had about 50 of those each night, and Henry was leading that week. There were several other folks there. FCCI was a part of it, but Henry was leading it. And we were going over, they gave me the itinerary. There were 6, 8, 10 people going over, and he said, you need to fly through Amsterdam and here. And I was looking online, and there was a direct flight to Ghana, which was right next to Liberia. They said, no, you shouldn't do that, security and various things, but I'm a little pioneering, and I thought, boy, that takes a day out of the trip. So I went alone, flew to Ghana. And then I got to Ghana. You had to leave the airport. You walked out of the airport, had to go back in, a little bit disoriented, trying to figure out. It was kind of a mob scene there. I walked back in the airport, figure out where I'm supposed to go. I've got about a 6 or 8 hour layover. I'm walking through the airport, and I see Henry Blackley sitting on the bench, all by himself in the middle of the airport. And I didn't know it at the time, but he'd been in Nigeria for a week, and so it was just a joy. I sat on the bench next to Henry for probably 6 or 7 hours, and he told me lots of stories about Richard and growing up and basketball and courting, and it was one of the greatest experiences. And then it was funny. I'll have to tell you, I didn't tell Richard this part, but we got through the conference. It's been 3 days long. Henry was speaking 2 and 3 times a day. One night was in the stadium. We met with the president and the vice president of the cabinet. It was great. We went to their version of the White House, and Henry really kind of charged President Sirleaf with what she was going to do. But so on the last day, so Henry spoke 3 or 4 times a day. I don't know, I think he got tired or something, he'd been in the heat in Liberia, and so he finished early. And so, they asked me to come up and speak for a couple minutes. And so it was really kind of funny. So I thought, what can I do to kind of joke around with Henry a little bit? So I got up and explained to these guys that America has a culture that, you save the best for last, you bring in the closer at the end, and the guy who's going to lead. And then I went on to say, we're going to take out the Bible and look at Matthew 20:16 about the last shall be first and the first will be last, and on and on and on. Henry got a kick out of that. But it was a great time with him over there, and really, really good memories of being around him. So, in all seriousness, I do have kind of an enviable task for the second time of speaking being wrapped around Richard or Henry Blackley 3 times. So it's what a joy. As Daniel was saying last night, what Bill told us to write down 4 or 5 points throughout the evening and throughout the weekend, and there were just so many there. I was looking back over. Daniel mentioned a couple, and I just invite you to think about what you wrote down and what you heard from Richard, and I'm so excited to hear what we're going to hear over the next throughout the day from him as well. I wrote down, the first one I wrote was what Daniel said. when I fail to grow, other people suffer. That was really impactful for me. Oftentimes, so many times in life, we think about, it doesn't hurt anybody else, or what I do is my own business, or whatever the case may be. So that was very, very convicting. Another one that was very convicting was, a statement he said of, what kind of hopelessness could somebody feel, or do you feel, if you as a Christian give up on somebody? Who else? That's somewhat of a kind of a low of lows that we should think about, and think about the gravity of that and the responsibilities that we have. And the last thing that I took from him, or that I wrote down from him, was the statement of how long have I been the same Christian? How long have I been the same in my prayer life, or in my study life, spiritual life growth? Are we growing? And I think that's awfully convicting to me. It's easy to get complacent with a lot of things in life, but so I would encourage you to keep doing that. The Blackbeard's been such a treasure, and such a treasure at FCCI and to each of us, and so impactful, the things that he has to say. So I'm going to take today to, I'm going to blend a little bit of my story and a little bit of FCCI, as Daniel said, many of you meet for the first time, and so I'm going to try to weave a little bit of who I am to get to know you into my story, and have a few points along the way. So the first thing to know about me, so I grew up, and I have kind of two dichotomies. I grew up in Swainsboro, Georgia. So Swainsboro, Georgia is a town of 7,000 people in South Georgia. It's the epitome of Mayberry. So folks that remember, I'm drawing a blank, the Andy Griffith Show and those guys. So we were essentially Mayberry. That picture is basically what it was 40 years ago when I was there, and it's basically what it is today. And it was a wonderful upbringing. I grew up in a Christian family. I mean, it's as I say, a very Mayberry type town. You've got Main Street and the Baptist church on one side and the Methodist church on the other side, and the police department, city hall's in the middle, and it was very much that kind of life. Grew up, going to grandparents' house. It was baseball, hot dogs, apple pie and Chevrolet, as they say, and that was the song that was out when I was there. And the Chevy dealership was right in the middle of town, and so that had a lot of impressionism, and it certainly impacted my worldview significantly. There's a little twist in my growing up in Swainsboro, and that is my dad was born in Brooklyn, New York. And so from a very early age, I kind of realized that our family was a little bit different. I didn't really know, it didn't necessarily impact things on a day-to-day life, but my dad had been born in Brooklyn, and there was a series of events that got him to go to college in Atlanta, met my mom, ended up going down to Swainsboro. I planned to move back to New York, but never did. So here, 50, 60 years later, he's still in, almost 50, 60 years later, they've moved down to Florida a little bit, but they stayed in Swainsboro. So the part where that intersected me is we went to visit a few times. My mom was an only child. My dad had 4 siblings, and both my grandparents were one of 7 or 8, and so lots and lots of family in New York, so we went up there. And then I went to high school in New York. So it was very much a culture shock to me, as you can imagine. You go from a small town of 6,000 up to New York for high school. So I was there 3 or 4 years in high school, and that also was significantly impacted my worldview. So I had, I don't know if it was the best of both worlds, but it was a very, very diverse upbringing of coming from a very small town and going into New York City, one with many cultures. My school had kids from 12, 14 countries. I was there during the hostage crisis, and I had about 7 or 8 classmates from Iran at the time, so that was a very interesting situation. The hostages actually landed in the town where my school was when they came back and went to West Point. So it was, so New York was kind of the big city, bright lights, and that impacted me and affected my worldview a good bit. So we're living along. My wife Robin's here, but we've got a picture here. Came back from New York. I guess New York carried me away a little long. So for Swainsboro, I got married a little bit late in life. I was 19, and Robin was 21. I think modern day we have terms for that, but we got married at 19 in Swainsboro, Georgia, and just to the other side is a picture. We celebrated our 30th anniversary last year, so that was we renewed our vows there. And then just a little more demographic. These are my boys. I've got 2 boys, Barrett and Christian, that some of you all have met. Barrett's been to a couple of conferences, and I don't think Christian has, but a few of y'all have met Christian. Also, Christian just spent a few days with Gary's son down in Florida just in the last month or so. So Barrett's 24 years old. He's graduated college in Sanford and lives in Birmingham now, and Christian's he's a sophomore in college right now. So I'm going to weave in kind of my company and the title of this talk. There's a title is Inspire, Influence, and Impact. And so as we start, I've got some definitions up here of inspiration. But I learned, as I say, coming out of my upbringing and then spending times in New York, I was very impressionable. I had a lot of things that kind of inspired me. I learned very early on about myself that I was just wired entrepreneurial. I don't know that I had that term when I was in high school, but I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And I enjoyed trying to figure things out and pioneering and connecting dots. And you know, both my grandparents were self-employed and small business owners. One grandfather had been an IBM typewriter salesman in New York, and you know, tossed that away and decided to open a shop across the river, and went upstate New York and opened up a office supply store. My other grandfather did very similar, the same. Had a food service distribution company in Swainsboro, Georgia. And so my dad was a lawyer, but there was a lot of business around, and I just kind of gravitated toward that. And so when I was in high school, you know, I was class president my senior year, and it was a boarding school. So you know, the big problem, the big issue of my administration was we couldn't get pinball machines in because our kids would tear them up, and so you know, I kind of hatched this idea. Well, if I bought them, you know, can I keep the quarters? And so you know, got my parents to help me buy a couple of pinball machines, and that was kind of the budding part. And then that turned into, wow, I've got these pinball machines and making a few dollars. If I buy pizzas, you know, I could sell pizza by the slice and have a whole little thing. So that was kind of my first business of understanding and trying to figure out how to solve a problem. And so from that standpoint, I feel that I'm just like everybody here in this room. I much more identify with, you know, what are the problems and challenges of starting a business, growing a business, you know, cash flow, human resources, you know, how do we do that? And talk a little bit about my journey to FCCI in a moment, but my story, I think, is much like most of you all in here. And I identify with starting and growing and being entrepreneurial and being in the marketplace. And so you know, kind of back to inspiration. You know, right, wrong, or indifferent, I was in New York, a little bit ironic now in modern day times, but I was in New York when Donald Trump was kind of larger than life the first time. You know, he was buying the plaza, and there was Trump Airlines came out, and all the casinos in New Jersey, and The Art of the Deal would have come out in the early 80s. And you know, when I left high school, I was all over the airways, and I decided I'm going to business school. That was the first book I bought. You know, I bought The Art of the Deal. That's the first non-textbook that I can remember, you know, reading and saying, you know, this is how you do it. You know, this is how you grow, and you slash and burn, and you know, the ends justify the means, and you know, that's kind of how I came out of high school, and that was my inspiration, if I will. You know, as I say, right or wrong, my inspiration was, you know, bigger, better, grow, money, material, jets, boats. You know, it was, you know, sorry to keep using the analogy, but it was kind of Donald Trump. I mean, he was front and center in New York. And so that kind of inspired me as I grew through life. As Daniel said, you know, this is a little bit of life now, but I've been involved in a lot of companies, and this is where we started. You know, One Path's a technology company, and sports companies and a restaurant. But it was, the story of my early career, and really even until today, is just out of business. And it was trying, and it was failing, and it was having some successes, and it was going through all of the grind, and still today that you all face. Robin and I bought into a company in college, and it was a travel company. And we ended up with 7 or 8 locations, and then the world kind of changed, and the travel industry changed, and we were essentially bankrupt. We didn't technically file bankrupt, and we kind of reinvented and came up with some new businesses and started over. So mine's been a constant story of that, of the highs and the lows. When I tell people in a business setting when I'm feeling really confident, I talk kind of about the brag sheet and all the things that we have done, but then the times that I'm at just low confidence and just feeling really down on myself, I look back and say, boy, my career of 30 years or so is one of, 2 or 3 really good years and really good successes. 4 or 5 that were kind of above average or pretty good, and like 25 that were just a complete failure. And it's, fighting those kind of voices of self-preservation and who are you and are you any good and what do you do? But that's somewhat is the life that we lead as entrepreneurs, and it's the life that we lead as business owners. We have good days and bad, and we have pressures that come from us from different places. And as I say, we've been bankrupt twice, and along the way, my spiritual life I found really mirrored my business life. My identity was largely in my business as who I am and what I'm doing, in my spiritual life. But my spiritual life, honestly, was kind of inversely related, in that when things were going well, I think I drifted away. I don't think I drifted away. I was, I could do it on my own. I could kind of figure it out. But then when things would come crashing down, as not proud of, but as many people might can relate to, when there's nowhere else to turn, you kind of make your way to your knees and kind of cry out to God as to, why did this happen? What did I do? Why me? Or whatever the case. And so I forget the analogy that Richard used of what his spiritual life looked like. I think he talked about catalysts that would grow in high growth periods and times that he would fade away. And I've always said mine was kind of like the stock market. I'd like to think it was largely moving up and to the right, but it was very choppy. It was things are going well, and sorry to say, I kind of would drift down, and then things would get bad, and it would kind of spike back up and run back to the church, or have an event, or the early in life things don't work out, and one set of things happening. Later in life, you're like, oh, I've got kids, I've got a wife, I've got a mortgage, and the stakes seem to get higher. So my identity and the things that really inspired me early in my life and my career caused my identity to be completely wrapped up in business. And things that I've learned in retrospect, you learn it in the moment, but it's really difficult to be in relationship with your family and with God and when other people, when your whole identity is wrapped up in business. And when the priorities and the stresses of what you're doing at work impact you more than your family and more than your spiritual life. And these are the things that are screaming at you. I've got the next project, the next job, I've got the next person to see, or thing to sell. And so that's a big part of my story, and that's a big part of kind of where my inspiration started. I'm just now thinking that we had roundtables last night, and I was going to stop for a second and have folks think we could share together. You could think for yourself, but I believe that's the next slide. So in contemplating, I was going to have us talk around the table, but if you could think for a moment just about what inspires you and who inspires you. And I think the who more so than the what. And something to contemplate is why. And hey, I'll try something. We'll see. This usually doesn't work when you have a crowd here. But if some people want to tell me, if you've thought about that for just a second, who are some people that, have inspired you, or why? Either way, who or why? So we'll go audience participation here. Who, somebody tell me either who has inspired them or why? Bill?
Henry Blackaby. And Richard is following that up. And it's because he forces me to take the scripture seriously.
Anybody else have a who or a why?
I think Richard Miller was very inspirational because he lived his entire life dependent totally on God. I mean, it didn't stop him from doing anything. He, traveling when he was in his 80s even, I think he was a pretty amazing person.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So, yes, sir.
Mother Teresa, because she, her life motto was, yes, God, now what's the question? And so that was total abandonment that she had for the Lord, and that's what I'm offering.
Yeah, that's great. Yes, ma'am.
My mom, who modeled a life of obedience to Christ.
So, yes, ma'am.
My son and my husband, who have been great liberators in my life. They're always supporting and challenging me, and always have a word from God of where I'm at or where I'm going. There's a lot of peace and joy in that.
Yeah. I have one more. I saw one or two. We got Wade. Reed, was that you, Wade?
Actually, I was pointing to Mary Alice, who had her hand.
Oh, okay.
I was going to say the same thing Mary Lee did. My mother, because she lived Christ before me all my years.
So I think what I'm hearing is that, one, the who's and also the why's are not the things that we hear about in culture as much. It's who. We heard of a lot of people who serve, who grow, who are dedicated, who are others focused. And, in my opinion, it kind of leads into the next part that I want to talk about, and that was just influence. Now, I put two definitions up there. They're both from the library, or both from the dictionary. And the second one's the one that I think we think about with influence. It has to do with power and position and authority. But the one that is the first one is where I'd like to spend a little bit of time, and that's, that you have an effect on the character development or the behavior of someone else. And just about everyone that was named here, maybe everyone that was named, the things that were kind of resonating with me were the influence that they had on you, and the influence that people had on me, the things that inspired, the things that that were done. So, in my experience, back to a little bit of my track, I think I found somewhere in my life that the inspiration that I started with was unfulfilling. And so I contemplated this question about, influence, and started to begin to reflect on influence and who are the people in my life who had the greatest influence on me. And I had two or three that I thought I'd share, and one was the headmaster of my school. The headmaster of my school when I went to boarding school in high school, it was a guy named Thad Horton, and Thad had a profound influence on me in that he was the chief marketing officer for Coca-Cola at this time, and then he felt a call and went to seminary and thought he was going to be a pastor, and long story short, he ended up as a headmaster of a school, the boarding school where I was. And he loved me, and he served me, and he mentored me, and he discipled me to a certain extent. But I saw the way that he lived his life, and the way that he treated others, and the way that he encouraged others, and the way that he built others up. And also a guy who took arguably one of the biggest positions in the business world, and then decided to come down and serve people and serve students and serve young people. And so, he had a great influence on me, and I still, when I write notes to kids that are graduating high school, I won't get I'll paraphrase, but he wrote in my yearbook when I left that, Chad, you're on a pedestal, and you're on a pedestal with me, and There's nothing that you could ever ask, and there's nothing that you will ever do that will surprise me. You know, I have great confidence in where you're going to go. But herein lies a problem. The opposite is true. Anything that you did to hurt or disappoint would shock and hurt a lot of people. And he said, you know, the world needs influencers. The world needs people on pedestals. And you need to get up there and you need to embrace and you need to challenge. And so it's a little simple paragraph. And you know, I've just contemplated both what he told me so many times, and I was very fortunate that as I got married, Robin got to meet him. We were able to take our children up to meet him a time or two before he passed away. And then I thought about two other people that many of which you all know here. Jim Moy, a lot of you all know. Jim was one of the founders of FCCI, and Jim started mentoring and discipling me 15 years ago, maybe more. I didn't even know he was doing it at the time. And he just walked. He was a businessman, but he was committed to using his business as a platform for ministry, and perhaps the most sold out and the most, you know, discipling person that I know. And just time and time, over and over, there was nothing I could tell him, nothing that I would tell him, great things and terrible things, but he just kind of accepted me for who I was. He served me over and over again. He paid for me to come to FCCI the first couple of times I came. And as I look through his life, and I've met the dozens and dozens and dozens of people that he did the same, you know, I start reflecting back that, you know, the influence he had and the inspiration he had was a whole lot different than the inspiration that I had coming out of high school and college and early in my career. And then as you really think back to that, you know, so Jesus was the first one that changed the paradigm on that became, you know, you get influenced by serving and servant leadership. And, you know, periods of history in the last 20 or 30 years, it's become more popular in our culture and in business and others. But, you know, that servant leadership model of serve and you gain influence, and serve and you gain authority. I mean, he was the epitome of tearing down, you know, positional authority, which we think of in the world as being the greatest type. You know, are you the president? Are you the owner of the company? Are you the governor? Are you the politician? Or whatever the case, you have the most money. You know, we all hear, what is it? You know, he who has the money makes the rules. You know, and kind of things like that. But as I start reflecting, that is the weakest form of leadership and the weakest form of power is authority. But the influence that you gain by serving people and the respect that you gain is far more greater. So as I contemplate more on leadership, on influence, many of you all have seen this, but we've got a few folks I know, the Opendahls and guys and others that have been a part of Giant. And I really love this. I really love this slide as it relates to us and how we lead and where we are as in the body of Christ and as a part of FCCI. And that is, we've all got circles of influence. And, you know, we start with ourselves. And then we move to our family and then our organization. And the key words here are intentional. And things that I learned about myself is that I had been just kind of going through life accidentally. And in some cases I had influence, in some cases I did some right things, in a lot of cases I did them wrong, but it was very haphazardly. And when you can convert to intentionality in what you do, and I think Richard talked about that in growing last night. If you're intentional in how do you grow your prayer life? How do you grow, you know, your walk with Christ? How do you know grow your knowledge of Scripture? The people that you're around, your influence grows. And in the context of where we are here at FCCI, you know, it begs the question to me that, you know, how do you use your influence in business? You know, do we serve, you know, the people that work for us or with us or partners or customers, people in the community? Do people in the community see us as having the highest standards of doing the things with excellence in all that we do? Or where are we? And we need to be intentional about that. So as I say, it was starting with self-awareness. And again, I was going to do this around a table, but I think this one is probably better just to think about. And these were a couple of questions that I was challenged with when you start thinking about who you are And if your influence begins with yourself, and in giant language, you need to know yourself before you can lead yourself, and know yourself to lead yourself to be able to lead others. I think these are two really good questions. The first two is, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? In terms of what Richard was saying, are you doing really well with your prayer life, but you're not doing so well in another area? Are you doing poorly in your prayer life, but you're doing well in somewhere? Where are our strengths so we know where to build? But the last question is the one that was very convicting for me. And that is, when you look in the mirror and when you think through your strengths and weaknesses, we love to talk about strengths, even weaknesses sometimes. But that last one to me was, what are the things about yourself that you just like to ignore? You're not honest with yourself about them, much less, with your spouse or your family or your business or in your life in the community. And so self-awareness is I think a very, very big key in what we do as business leaders. And so kind of related to that in the business is the only other slide that I brought, because it has a little bit to do with my story, is one that Giant kind of calls a power test. And the context here is business leaders. It's, you have this, we all have influence and we all have power based on where we are, who we are, just in society. And if we even think of this, the power that we have in the world, but within our family and other places, and this is in the context of business, that, when you're relating to someone else and you're talking to someone else, particularly an employee-employer kind of relationship, I think the question is, are you for me? Are you against me? Are you for yourself? And I think that can apply to your family, to your kids. Richard gave a great illustration with his son. He used different language, but he was trying to use his power in a couple of different ways. He was somewhat self-motivated in what he wanted. He was wanting something for his son that is what he wanted. He wasn't listening to what his son wanted, and it was damaging the relationship. And so when we put the two together, if we go to the ones in my life, the headmaster in my life, Jim Moy in my life, and Jesus in my life, and you look, and I think we would all agree that the real influence comes when you take the power that you have and in humility, which is serving, then you gain the real true influence. And so to kind of bounce back a little bit to my story, along the time that I was kind of figuring out where my inspiration was, figuring out where I was misguided, figuring out what was unfulfilling and how to change that in my life, I started looking back at work also. And it became very obvious and painfully obvious in a lot of times that, if I really wanted to evaluate how I was using my power and influence, it was largely for myself, if not exclusively for myself. I was overtly against people around me many times, whether they knew it or not. And I certainly don't think I was for others very much. And when I kind of counterbalanced that with the people that were influential in my life and people that I aspired to be, it became really, really obvious that the common denominator is that they were for me. And they then had great influence over me. I wanted to be like them. I wanted to reciprocate. I wanted to serve. And the people that we named out, Henry Blackley, Mother Teresa, goodness gracious, can you get more of serving others? And then the influence that she had. That she had nothing, I would say the world, but even personalized, she had nothing that I was inspired for or aspiring toward, early in my career, but the influence that she had was so incredible. So just the questions that, again, I really want to have some conversations around the table. I don't know if this would work, audience participation, but the questions that I really wanted to ask is, how can you use your influence in business to grow the kingdom? I think we can do that one aloud, whether it's yours or just in general. And so why don't we just pause there? Let's just kind of do the same thing. What are ways that we can use our business, our influence in our business, to impact the kingdom?
Minister to your employees.
Minister to your employees. I had breakfast with someone that some folks know here, Peter Frizzell in South Carolina, and Chris Patton, and they've created a whole program. They said that is where it starts, is that if you don't care for your employees, those are the people you have the most influence on. So many times we want to jump ahead and how we're going to change the world, or what are we going to do in the community. And back to those circles of influence, you really need to start with yourself, and your family, and your team, and your organization. But what are some other ways we can use our business and the influence that we have in business?
For ways to impact your customers.
Look for ways to
Not communicate.
Yes.
The light shines darkest in the dark, and so whenever you choose to run your business on values based on the light, it shines so much greater when everybody else is doing it completely opposite.
Yeah, isn't that interesting how, the officer last night, an incredible story. And, over and above, even anything that I could imagine. But what he runs into, I'm sure people just like him run into hundreds, if not thousands of times a day in the United States. And so, in some ways, not to diminish, because incredibly heroic what they've done as a family, but it's kind of sad that this happens thousands of times a day, and one person takes a step, and it gets all the way to the State of the Union, and to the president, and television shows everywhere, and it just seems like that we can do better, and that story ought to happen in some degree hundreds and thousands of times a day. But it's so true that when light shines through, it just really illuminates, particularly in the culture that we live in today. Any others? One, two others? Yeah.
I think for our FCCI group, we've been really aware that the way that our businesses are impacting the community are really vital, because Albuquerque unfortunately has had this darkness kind of settle over us, and top of the bad list, bottom of the good list, and I think we've become very aware that as we run our organizations in a God-honoring, God-glorifying manner, that we are helping to change the culture of the city itself.
Yeah, I think without a doubt, yeah, there it is.
Maybe just a little thing, but one of the ways that we can use our business to serve God's kingdom is to speak God's truth in language that our culture can understand.
Boy, that gets into a whole different topic, doesn't it? But I think in the context of this room, we have language and we have kind of predisposed attitudes, and we have things that we all agree with, that when we walk out of this room, it's met with anywhere from lack of understanding to just craziness. What did, I think it was Daniel said last night, where you have a mental illness because you pray, to hostility. And so I think that's a tremendous one, is how do we interact with the world? How do we embrace? What are the all the surveys and statistics that we read that we brought on a lot of ourselves, is that we're judgmental, we're harsh, we're closed-minded, we're hateful in a lot of ways with people that don't agree with us. And you overlay that over Jesus and where he was, and so many people in our churches and our pastors and myself, when I look around, as I think about my attitude towards someone else, I think, boy, that is just the exact opposite of where Jesus would have been, and the acceptance of where we are.
Well, one of the things that helps me is I think about the verse where it says the fruits of the Spirit, but so many times we focus on that verse, but we forget the end of it, which is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against these things there is no law, and that always strikes me, because when you have a culture that's against any sort of churchy or religious talk, but they're not against love, joy, peace, patience exhibited.
Yeah.
In whatever it is.
Thank you.
earlier you talked about that which we ignore, and that as business people, we tend to be apologetic about our faith rather than live our faith. And then the people around us, if we live it, if we talk and then we live what we talk, it really, they're looking for that. But if we ignore it because we're apologetic, we're afraid to show our faith because it's not politically correct in this culture. Whereas, as he said earlier, they're looking for life. If it's not coming from us, where's it coming from?
That's right. Yeah, actions and words, right? The quote, preach the gospel everywhere you go, use words if necessary.
Well, and the addendum to that, which is use words that people can relate to, and don't use religious maxims.
Right, right. Well, yeah.
It seems to me that the whole thing comes down to authenticity. If you're doing a recipe type Christianity, okay, I go to church Sunday, I go to prayer Wednesday, I don't swear, I do this and that, so you have your little checklist, then your influence is very small. But when you authentically, like the officer saying, well, we'll know when the Lord's ready, the Lord said, this is, here it is, and he knew it. And we can think of our own lives where the Lord said, do that, and you did that. And then Jesus' light shines through it, breaks through, and people are saying, whoa, why'd you do that? It shocks them because they have never encountered this pouring through, because it's not what we do, it's what he does, because we have heard what he said and we let him take the reins and go, rather than us deciding how safe it is.
Right. Well, thank you. These are all tremendous responses, and I think there's things that we can think about and we can encourage them about. And the mission of FCCI is to encourage and equip, and we need to hear these stories. We need to build the confidence, and we need to understand how that we can relate into our world, which kind of leads to the last one for me, which just kind of ties it all together. And that word was impact. Inspiration is a start, and influence is vitally important. But the action to me comes together with impact. And the results of the inspiration and the influence become the impact that we can have in the world. And this thought motivated me enough to name my current company Impact 252. And the impact was the result of saying, what do we want to do? We want to inspire, influence, and impact. And impact became the action word that we need to do. And the 252 comes from Luke 2:52, when Jesus grew in wisdom, stature, and favor of God and man. And although I think that applies to every aspect of our life, we were starting a company that dealt with youth and kids in sports, and so we thought that fit really, really well to that you had kids that are growing in wisdom, growing in stature, and we're a training facility, and then growing in favor of God and man. And so I am and matter of fact, I put up there, so this is this is just a little clip of our mission, vision, and values. So kind of back to my journey, I started with this inspiration that became misguided, started contemplating influence and how we're using it in negative ways, how we could use it in positive ways, and then through a transformation and a lot of help from FCCI and people within FCCI, it kind of culminated of saying, here's what our career is going to be about for the rest of our lives. And if we can run things in our business through the filter of how do we impact, how do we inspire, influence, and impact others to grow in wisdom, stature, and favor of God and man. And so that's the lens that we're trying. We fail every day. And every day we're looking at P&Ls and how do we do, and are we going to make payroll on Friday, and kind of things like that. But we have the lens, and we tried to go, I won't go through the value and the construct under that, but that became, for us, how we wanted to live out what we're doing. And me, back to self-awareness, I'm for the Myers-Briggs fans, I'm an ENFP, or my wife thinks I'm a thinker more than a feeler, but I'm definitely a connector and a pioneer. But I'm a little bit of the next shiny object. I've been in a lot of companies that have moved around, and so for me, part of naming the company and putting this together for me was the constant reminder of what's the mission, what's the vision, how are we going to live this out? It's really difficult when we have a partner meeting and this kind of flashes up, and the question is, well, how are we doing that? I know we're going to get the P&L, balance sheet, and are we growing, sales projections and all that, but this kind of helps, or at least helps me to be a constant reminder to be intentional. And it changes conversations with our managers of how are we serving to gain influence? How are we serving each other? How are we serving our customer? Maybe we market a little different. Hey, is it okay to give away and serve our customers, and then maybe when they have a need, they'll come back to us? And so, Jesus gave us that model of servant leadership, and this isn't a prosperity ministry talk, but it just kind of seems to work out that when you serve people, you gain influence, and when you gain influence, sometimes good things happen, and people grow, and things happen around the company. So this is, again, to tie it together, if we can inspire, influence, and impact, that's what our objective is. And so I think that ties really well to FCCI. And I want to share a little bit about FCCI, a little bit about our journey. Let's see how we're doing here. So this ought to work out well. So many of you all probably know this. FCCI, and I've paraphrased a little bit here, but the vision is transforming the world through Christ, one company leader at a time. So that's what we're all about, and that's been the guiding influence here late in life of what we're trying to do. The mission is in pursuit of Christ's eternal objectives, we encourage and equip, or equip and encourage Christian business leaders, and it goes on. And I want to take a couple of moments just to kind of give you my journey to FCCI and to tell you a little bit about what's going on with us right now, because there's some incredible things that I don't think we ever could have imagined that are happening. FCCI was a real turning point in my life. I don't know that I recognized it, 12, 13 years ago, but as I was being mentored and invited to conferences, and it started the realization to tie things together as to what business should be about and what life should be about. And I've shared a little bit of that transformation, but I became involved with FCCI about 12 or 13 years ago through a person who was discipling me. I've been to a lot of conferences, 10, 11, 12, 13, and about 3 years ago now, I think, I've been saying 2 years, but I think it's probably coming up on 3, I got asked to be on the board. And the story of me coming on the board is really, a picture-perfect epitome of both discipleship and serving and helping someone to grow. And that Jim Moy, who I referred to, he was one of the founders. And maybe 5 or 6 or 7 years before I came on the board, he's 85 now, I believe, or 86. And so I started driving him to his board meetings and traveling with him to the conferences a day early so he'd go to the board meetings. And all along, he's discipling, and he's drip marketing, and he's leading, and he's teaching, and he's telling me about influence and telling me about stewardship and giving me graphic examples when I've asked him advice about, how do you use your company as a platform? How do you use your life? What does it mean that God owns it all? Probably the most graphic to me was in a very difficult time financially. We were essentially bankrupt, and Jim probably sensed it was a learning moment. I never asked him, but he wanted to tell me a little bit about stewardship, and he said, you know what, Chad, here's how I want to explain stewardship. If you came to me tomorrow and said, hey, Mr. Moy, can you give me $10,000? I really need it. He said, I love you, and as a friend and as a mentor, he said, I would just want to give it to you. I probably would. He said, but you see, God owns my whole business, and he owns my life. And so if you ask me for that, I've got to think about that in terms of stewardship. Is that what I should do with that $10,000? Is that what I should do? Maybe I'd give it to you, maybe I wouldn't. I don't know. But it's a simple analogy. I've heard it 100 times, but to me, it sunk in, and it changed the filter as to how you should view your company and view your whole life, actually, but in terms of FCCI, your company. And so Jim kind of did that, and then after about 5 years of taking him to the meetings, he stepped up and said, hey, I'm resigning and I would like Chad to come on the board. And they ultimately didn't let him resign, but another year or two later, I think the board said, hey, that's not the way it works. But, you know, another year went by and I came on the board. And then last year when Terrence resigned, he resigned just before the conference and just through a sequence of events. And, you know, I just think God's hand has been so involved with not only my journey at FCCI, but where we are today and what we have in our future, that I'm running businesses and a part of businesses, and you saw the chart, had plenty to do, didn't have enough margin, already was not spending enough time with family and others. But on one of the board calls in the search committee and said, hey, what do you think, Chad? Would you consider it? And I said, no, not at all. Robin said, no, not at all. First night we spoke about it. And then a few things happened, and we had hired someone to run the sports business, and that's where most of my time was. And one path, the company had just sold, and so they had actually just asked me to clean out my office, and I had done that. And so it just became, over the course of a couple of weeks, it just became strangely obvious that there is some margin here. You know, there is some ability to get in. And what really spoke to me is that, you know, FCCI is 40 years old now. And much like many of the ministries that are national, certainly, and maybe some locally, in the workplace, in the marketplace ministry environment, is that many of them are 20, 30, 40 years old, and many of them have the same boards or founder or CEOs and things of that nature. And we owe a great debt of gratitude to that greatest generation. You know, they have built so much for us, both in the world and in terms of ministry. But if there's a little flaw or a little weakness in that, it is that they were kind of brand builders and worked in silos. And much like our formal denominational churches are in a lot of silos, and you know, the Methodist and Baptist and Catholic and Presbyterian, you know, they're almost viewed as competitors, right? There's certainly not a lot of, you know, synergy, or, you know what, you don't dunk, or you don't dip, or you don't this, y'all are wrong and we're right, and our theology, and I think an unintended consequence of a lot of the marketplace ministries has been kind of the same. And so I thought maybe there's an opportunity. I've been kind of mentored by a couple of the founders for a lot of years. I've been on the board for a couple of years. I've got some trust and some relationship with them, and maybe here's an opportunity to kind of do some generational transfer, to do some succession kind of planning. How are we going to get it for the next 40 years? I told Richard Blackaby, I said, you know, your dad was so instrumental. He's been the kind of the spiritual advisor of FCCI since the very beginning. And I said, you know, Richard, you're becoming very influential in a lot of places. I said, but we really need your son. You know, I said, no offense, but I don't think I'm going to invite you to come to the next conference. But if your son's available, you know, let's try to get him. We've got to preserve the message that we have, but we're going to have to change our methods a little bit, and we're going to have to reach people a little bit differently. And so that's where we started. So that became clear to Robin and I that I know a little bit about business, more failures than successes, but I kind of understand that if you provide a product or a service that people want, you do a good job, you'll stay in business. I really don't know anything about ministry. Matter of fact, I kind of turn my nose at a lot of them. Been on a few boards, volunteered, but you know, just like a lot of you all probably do at times, you think, or it's cliche, you know, it's just run like a ministry. There's not accountability. You know, there's not. If they would only run this like a business, if they would collaborate, if they would serve, if they would listen to the customers, and you know, it's a ministry though. It's not a business. And so, I don't know if that's right or wrong, and I'm a little in over my head and figuring that out and understanding the ministry side of it. But I hope that there's some generational transfer and some kind of blending and some new ideas of collaboration. So to tell you a little bit about what's happening in the world right now, so I have met dozens of workplace and ministry and CEO leaders around the country in particular, and from a big shift, some of the largest ones, if you go to C12 and Convene or CBMC and There's 2 or 3 others, Truth at Work, and several others are very similar to FCCI. And so I've had the benefit of spending a day with, at my house with the CEO of C12, and spending a couple of weekends with the guy at Convene, and meeting the chairman of CDMC for lunch a couple of times, and the president there. And one thing that's just kind of interesting, I don't know what it means, but all of those have new CEOs within the last 2 years. And they're all trying to figure out, hey, how do we do things differently? Should we be collaborating, or what are we doing together? If you take a pessimistic view, you could say, boy, we've been at this for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and our market share really hasn't grown. Matter of fact, it's declined. A little bit similar to organized denominational religions. We're kind of losing ground there. And so maybe it's time to do things a little bit differently, or try some new ideas, and we'll see where God leads with that. So we have the Museum of the Bible, which Daniel referenced, and that was an event that was set up before I came on. And so honestly, out of a little bit of defense, I started calling some of these guys and saying, hey, would you like to come? And as I talked to them, I said, well, what do you do? And how do you do it? And what services do you offer? And what do you do for your CEOs? And you start to see some patterns. And again, being a little bit naive, but also just my business background of trying to bring people together and be a consensus builder and not reinvent the wheel, I came to the personal conclusion, which may be wrong, this is a personal, not a FCCI statement, is that there's a lot of us out there doing a lot of similar things, and some people do groups very well, some do conferences real well, some have web evangelism, some have downloads, some have small groups, some have facilitated groups, and we're all trying to get kind of the same people. And so it occurred to me, shouldn't we all be talking? Shouldn't there be a way to take best practices and work together, whether that's geographically or nationally in other places? And so this Museum of the Bible has become kind of a clarion call for that. And we've got somewhere 16, 17, 18 of the national ministries are coming to the museum next weekend. I didn't know this, but several folks have called and said, I don't even understand, this is the first time this has ever happened. We've never had these guys in the same room together, and they're bringing their constituents. So we've got, 450, 60, 70 people that are coming in, just like this room, largely CEOs and business owners. We're meeting with Steve Green, the Green family in Hobby Lobby, who, they funded the $1.2 billion museum, which is unbelievable in and of itself. And I don't have time now, but ask folks that have been there, get out and see that. This is going to be a treasure for years and years to come. And so Steve's going to host a lunch with these ministry leaders. Dr. Ben Carson's going to be there. Henry Cloud's going to do a couple of workshops. And all of these people came because they saw some collaboration coming together. Henry Cloud, who charges $65,000 for a 60-minute talk, said, oh, you've got these guys coming together. I'm in. If I can help influence how we kind of build a coalition, I'm in. Ben Carson, right away, same thing. Said, I'll be a part of it. And, at risk of sounding like we're bragging a little bit, last week out of the blue, we get a call from the museum is hosting PureFlix, which is the Christian Netflix, and they produce Guys Not Dead and Case of Christ and Ultimate Gift and hundreds of movies, Christian-based, values-based movies. They're coming in to do a private screening for Mike Pence and the Vice President. And the museum called and said, hey, if you're going to be in town today early, why don't you come? We're going to have 15 people to spend an hour or so with the Vice President, and then we'll go in and watch the screening. And so it just feels like things that we couldn't have really imagined what would happen. Maybe there's an opportunity for influence. And so, as I close, I'd like to say, there's just a lot of things going on. Even this morning, I was almost late this morning because some guys from Brazil called and did a Skype, and they said, hey, we started FCCI group about a year ago, and we've been testing it. And, we talked to our Crown people here, and they took your Pathway to Purpose, and I hope it was okay. They translated the whole thing into Portuguese for us. And they said they print it. And he said, you know, we just wanted to talk about this model because we think we are geared to put a half a dozen groups in our state, and we think we can be national by next year. And so there's just a lot of just really great things. Those of you all there at the conference, there was, 20 from Malaysia and China and Ukraine and Europe. And so there's a lot of things that are happening across the world. And where I want to close is it just feels like, God is on the move. And it's probably appropriate, as Richard said, with Billy Graham's funeral today, and it's quoted so many times that the statement that's been made famous in workplace ministries that he said, the next great movement of God is going to be in the marketplace. And that's a significant challenge for us. As Richard said last night, America needs the church to go to a new level. And expanding influence and impact, I added that. And much like that, Albuquerque needs the same, and that was voiced a couple of times. We need the people in this room to go to a new level. And as Richard kind of said also, we need our families, we need our businesses to go to a new level of impact and influence. And so if I would leave you with a challenge, is to really contemplate and take a little bit of time today and through the weekend and talk with people in this room. There's a lot of people doing this very, very well, is how can you inspire and influence and impact others in your business and in your life, for the kingdom. And so that's the charge of where we are. And I thank you all for coming. I'm excited to hear what Richard says the rest of the days and hear from Siobhan and Guillermo and Bill and the breakouts. And so thank you all.